Good morning, Abundant Life Church. This is Pastor Chris, and today we're going to be looking at John chapter 4, verses 43 down through 54. As a pastor, I've made lots and lots of hospital calls over the years. One of them was particularly memorable for me. We had a young couple in our church in Oregon, uh, good friends of ours, and we got a call from her, the wife, one night that her husband Dan had fallen and hit his head. He had had a seizure, which he'd been prone to do, was in the emergency room. She was beside herself with worry. I said, no problem. I'll be right there. So dash down to the emergency room. I walk in and there's the wife. Her name's JJ. And you can tell she's been crying. She's just distraught looking. So came up to her, said, okay, how's Dan? Are you okay? She says, I don't know. They won't tell me anything. And right then, here comes a doctor. And he's one of these doctors that looks like he's about 14 years old. Doogie Howser came out to see her. And she said, Doctor, what have you found out? How's my husband? And I'll never forget, it wasn't just what he said to her, but how he said it. He just looked at her and said, well, first of all, calm down. Now, I was a little taken aback by that. And he said, do you think we don't know what we're doing? Now, poor JJ is now just fighting back tears because here's this junior high school doctor who's chewing her out. And I realized I need to get her away from him. And so really he had no information at that point, but I got JJ into where the chairs were. We sat down, we talked. I was trying to be as calming and reassuring as I could. And we prayed. And about a half hour later, a nurse, thank goodness, came out and said Dan was stable. He was going to be okay, but he couldn't go home tonight. They were just keeping him for observations, but there was no danger. Okay, so everybody's relieved now. And after about another hour, we got to go in and see Dan, and he was awake and everything was good. And I said, hey, JJ, I'm going to let you be alone with Dan for a little bit. I'm just going to stretch my legs. Went out and I found that nurse. And I told her, thank you for how you dealt with us. And who is that doctor's supervisor? She said, why? I said, I've been a pastor for a lot of years. I have never, ever seen a doctor speak to a patient's spouse the way that he did. And I said, and if it had been me, if it had been my wife that was in the ER and he spoke to me like that, well, he'd be needing a doctor himself. I was not happy. I was ticked off. And I could tell that this nurse had had a few problems with the doctor because she got this smile on her face and said, I would be glad to give you his supervisor's number. Yeah. And I did. I called the supervisor the next day and told him what happened. But back to that same night, about a half hour later, I know this nurse talked to the doctor because he came in again. His attitude was 100% different. Well, how is everybody doing? Are there any questions that I can answer for you? Rudeness changes the atmosphere quickly, and it never changes it for good. If you've ever dealt with somebody who is just needlessly and purposely rude, it doesn't make things better. In fact, often it gets people who weren't planning to be rude themselves. In today's section, frankly, there's a character who's pretty rude. And the problem is, it's Jesus. A father whose son is dying comes to Jesus for help, and Jesus does heal his son, but not before he's pretty snippy about it. Now, what was all that about? Well, let's go ahead and start looking at the passage. We're going to be in, again, John chapter 4, starting in verse 43. After the 2 days, he left for Galilee. Now, Jesus himself had pointed out that a prophet has no honor in his own country. Now, let's just stop right there and say a lot's been happening. Jesus down in Jerusalem had cleared the temple, and now he heads home. he heads up north to Galilee. This is where he grew up, and it's a lot different there. They know him there. In some ways, it's going to be more difficult because they're going to have problems getting past the idea that we remember this guy when he was a little boy. I mean, Jesus is only about 30 years old at this point, and I can tell you at this age, 30 years seems like nothing. We remember him when he was just a little boy. And some aren't going to get past the idea that this guy has cleared the temple. This guy is making claims to be the Messiah. So what are people going to think of him? Verse 45. When he had arrived in Galilee, the Galileans welcomed him. They had seen all he had done in Jerusalem at the Passover festival, for they had also been there. A lot of his hometown people had been in Jerusalem for the Passover. They're well aware about Jesus clearing the temple and the fact that clearing the temple was a claim to be the Messiah. They understood that. And even those who weren't there would have heard about it by now. So Jesus and this claim that he made, that's on everybody's mind at this point. And it's going to be natural for each person to have their own opinion about what it all meant. And that was the setting that Jesus walked into. So now look at this healing, verses 46 and 47. Once more he visited Cana in Galilee, where he had turned the water into wine. And there was a certain royal official whose son lay sick at Capernaum. When this man heard that Jesus had arrived in Galilee from Judea, he went to him and begged him to come heal his son, who was close to death. And, a royal official, this tells us he's probably working for King Herod, who was not considered by the Jews to be their king. He was the guy the Romans said, hey, this is your king. Most of the Jews hated Herod. And so a royal official, this isn't going to be somebody who's going to be real keen towards Jesus. All right. However, his son is dying. And when you're a father in a situation like that, you will do whatever it takes. He hears that this Jesus has caused quite a stir and he might be the Messiah. So he's going to take a chance. Of course, he's going to come and ask for help from Jesus. And Jesus does end up helping him. He heals the son, but not before he chews him out and not before he embarrasses him. Look at verses 47 and 48. When this man heard that Jesus had arrived in Galilee from Judea, he went to him and begged him to come heal his son, who was close to death. Unless you people see signs and wonders, Jesus told him, you will never believe. Okay. Jesus just asked him, would you come and heal my son? He must believe, otherwise he never would have asked. And Jesus gets all exasperated. Why do you people insist on a miracle? Well, because his son is dying. A father is pleading for the life of his son. And in response, Jesus says, you need to have better faith? Seriously? And once again, this guy did believe, or he wouldn't have come to Jesus asking for a miracle in the first place. Just what exactly did Jesus want from this guy? Look at verses 49 through 53 now. The royal official said, sir, come down before my child dies. Go, Jesus replied, your son will live. The man took Jesus at his word and departed. While he was still on the way, his servants met him with the news that his boy was living. When he inquired as to the time when his son got better, they said to him, yesterday at 1 p.m, the fever left him. Then the father realized that this was the exact time at which Jesus had said to him, your son will live. So he and his whole household believed. The official asked Jesus to come with him. Jesus knows he doesn't actually have to be there to heal this kid, so he just sends the man off. And John very specifically says that this father, took Jesus at his word that his son would be healed, and that's exactly what happened. So again, we see that this guy did have faith. He didn't go away discouraged. Even when Jesus said, oh, just go on, I'll heal him. He didn't argue. He didn't continue to plead. He trusted and he obeyed, which makes it seem even more out of place that Jesus would respond to him as rudely as he did. Jesus's rudeness is a very obvious factor in this scene, But what did it mean? Well, I think we'll find out next time. Till then, have a great day.